Hello, this is Barry from Blanchardstown Library, and I'm back with another video from our Ordinary People with Extraordinary Stories series of interviews. And this time we're joined by Ross Boyd. Now, Ross is somebody who we've got to know at the Europe Direct Information Centre at Blanchardstown Library, as Ross has attended many of our events and is a young person who shows a great interest and has a passion for issues that affect young people, particularly at a European level. So, good afternoon, Ross, and thank you for joining me.
Oh, good afternoon, Barry. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, and it's great because we've interviewed quite a few different people already, and it's nice now to hear I suppose a young voice and hear what issues are important to you. So, just to start off, Ross, you're in college at the moment, is that right?
Yes, I'm studying in DCU. I'm in my final year studying social sciences and culture innovation, so heavy work in there.
Okay, and how did you get interested in those subjects?
I think it was mainly from doing politics and society as a leaving cert subject. I did that just down the road in Castleknock Community College, and that's where I mainly got my political interest there. So it was firstly learning about how politics worked, sort of in my local area, then expanded, of course, to the national area, and then, of course, to the European level. However, I suppose my main European level interest was started when I first got involved with the This Time I'm Voting campaign in 2019. So the rest is history, as I say, from that. But that was definitely the first bit of moment.
Yeah, and I remember
got properly involved.
I remember you contacting us about that. All right, we ran a campaign to encourage people to register to vote in the European elections, and just to move on from that. Obviously, just before we spoke, you mentioned that you're studying from home at the moment. What's that been like?
It's been tough, definitely with the sort of not having exams, but rather having lots of assignments of about 2,000, 3,000, up to 4,000 words, and knowing you have to do that all in a very tight time frame of the next over 3 weeks, I think, for myself, is quite tough, and definitely trying to balance that while also having to stay at home, have to have 9 a.m. lecture still, is tough, is hard, especially trying to stay to not get Zoom fatigue, especially, but also the social aspect.
Yeah.
I think most importantly, not being able to sort of go to friends and sort of ask them for help or even just have a talk with them. I think that's been the toughest bit. So definitely, I think coming tomorrow will be like the first day of the easing of the restrictions. So I think that'll make things a lot easier to be able to meet some people I couldn't before.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I agree with you there. I mean, that there's certain advantages to working or studying from home, but missing that social contact is certainly one of the downsides of it. And just we were talking about politics and your interest. Is there something that would have been spoken about a lot in your family, or is there any political history in your family or anything like that?
Not particularly. I think the absolute irony of my family and politics that my parents absolutely diverged from what my politics are. They thought my mom and my dad would definitely be voting sort of traditional parties that have always been in government, while I very much will be the opposite of that. But I think it is a case of we do have healthy discussions in there, so there isn't really as much political history. There is actually a bit of a journalistic history of my dad, but I think that's all as far as it goes. I don't think they're really as interested in politics.
And could you tell us about that?
News,
could you tell us a little bit your dad's journalistic history?
Yeah, sort of a brief array. I think he was mainly involved in when he was actually in South Africa, especially. He was sort of talking about that, and also a little bit in Ireland too. It wasn't as much as sort of his other careers because he very much was going from job to job to job. But it's sort of a brief interview with that. So when I sort of went involved in student media, he very much was saying, "Oh, we should do this, that, and the other." Although I didn't want to hear all of it sometimes, it definitely provided some use anyway.
Yeah, well, it's good to hear that you can have good discussions at home, and I think that sometimes that we've seen in recent years in Ireland and maybe in other countries as well, that this kind of ability to discuss differences of opinion in a civil way has been lost in some ways. So it's nice to hear that that's still happening in your family. So I'm just going to move on from that. You mentioned to me when we were talking, kind of corresponding before all this, that you do some work as a Eurodesk ambassador. So could you tell me, first of all, what Eurodesk is and what your role is as an ambassador?
Yeah, perfect. So Eurodesk is an organisation around all across Europe, but also from sort of the wider European area. So it includes all the way up to Armenia and that countries as well, so you have to think of that. So this is very much an information website. So Eurodesk itself is based off providing information to particularly young people especially, but for basically opportunities to basically be able to work, travel or study abroad. And as a Eurodesk ambassador in Ireland, my job is mainly to provide that information to young people by connecting with sort of other European youth centres or indirect centres as well. So it's by spreading that and also going to youth groups and telling people across, especially young people, that they can sort of work and travel and study with Europe with little barriers.
And tell us a little bit more about some of those opportunities that are available to young people to go abroad. So you mentioned work and study, for example.
Yeah, so of course with the European Union, of course, you have the Schengen area and you have the common travel area, but that's also the case that you can be able to work and travel anywhere in the EU or any sort of visas. That's one of the big benefits. But however, there are lots of programs to be able to travel and study, especially. I think the biggest one is volunteering is the European Solidarity Corps, the ESC, and that's a case of where you get to go travelling to any country for a certain period of time and all your costs are paid for. So it's very much a case of you learn a lot in your sort of host country where you go to, and I know a load of young people have found this sort of incredible to be able to go to that. So it's simple things like that, but also through work and study, you can also have the Erasmus Plus, for example.
I was going to ask you about that.
I was trying to go for college, but of course, this thing called the COVID-19 pandemic hit. So it's very much a case of, even now, actually with the COVID pandemic, it is a case of that we will have a vaccine soon, hopefully, so that we'll be able to travel more and be able to sort of plan now, and that's sort of the big aim of Eurodesk, to start planning now.
And Ross, you were telling me that you've actually been to the European Parliament twice for kind of two very different reasons. Can you tell us about those trips?
Yeah, perfect. I can tell you about that. I think I've actually found out from realisation that Brussels is the only place I've been to since 2019. I haven't been any other place in Europe, never mind to 2020, but also 2019, which is just Brussels. So in January, I went with the European Parliament as a student journalist. I was briefly involved in student journalism there with the college newspaper. So through that, I got a trip to the European Parliament and got to talk to MEPs and also tour the Parliament itself. And that was really insightful to understand what Europe does, but also talk to MEPs, because I don't think they're as accessible in some ways to young people. So to be able to ask them any question you like almost is a very much refreshing fact, especially Irish MEPs as well. I think I got to meet almost every single Irish MEP at the event or soon after. And then following up in November last year, I got to go with the One campaign, which is a sort of an organisation developed to sort of advocate for international development and ending extreme poverty. So I was a very much different role in that, where I was actually lobbying MEPs and making sure to get commitments from them. And it was a case I visited people from the EPP and the FCD, so both centre-right and centre-left, in order to come together on this issue. And it was fairly successful, actually, so I was happy with that. But it was very much two different ways of seeing the Parliament in that way, and I really enjoyed both of them.
Okay, that's interesting. And just, you're speaking about journalism there in the Parliament. After college, what do you see yourself doing? Would you like to go into journalism? Would you perhaps like a role in the EU, maybe run as an MEP one day?
You have more answers than me in that question. I have to put it that way, because I think it is a case of, initially I wanted to do journalism, but then again I said that right before I chose my CAO courses that I wouldn't do journalism, and then of course it came full circle. So I think we'll see the next 6 months. I got the second semester in college, so I got lots of time to hopefully choose what I will do. But definitely MEP or the European Commission, as I joke, could be a possibility sometime. But small steps.
So watch this space. You never know what we'll see in the future. So I can say maybe in a few years I knew Ross before he was the head of the European Commission. Who knows? Who knows what the future holds? You're obviously very engaged and very passionate about issues that are important to young people. You've just spoken about that. Could you tell me about some of the issues in particular that are important to you as a young person? And you already mentioned a few to me, like youth employment, climate change, education, for example. So what are the ones that really count for you?
Well, I think for me, especially as a young person, I think it's making sure young voices are heard, and especially I represented the National Youth Council of Ireland at the EU Youth Dialogue that happened 2 months ago in Germany. So unfortunately that was virtually, but it was a case of actually having a space. It was on Youth Goal 9 of the European Youth Goals, on a space and participation for all, and making sure young people's voices are heard. So it is on these big issues that you mentioned, education, climate change, and youth unemployment. So I think making sure young voices are heard in these discussions, not as a tokenistic thing, but as a way of that they're crucial to debate. And I think it is a case where the Commission are improving their communications, but I think it is a case of making sure they understand what ways to sort of make sure the voices are heard from all young people. but also young people who may not have those voices heard before and when should have heard too.
And what can the European Union do you think, or even the likes of me at Europe Direct do, to get more young people engaged and interested in these issues?
I think it's to make it interesting, really. I think it's a case of sometimes the Parliament can be too far from people in sort of both literally, but also just mentally. And a case of if you don't search for it yourself, you sort of only go slightly into it, you sort of realise how much there is to it and how much actual legislation and bills that affect our own country gets implemented in the European Parliament. We always hear it as a case of only when we see it as a kind of way to European Parliament, when we see the sign saying funding came from this, or when we go on holidays, but we don't actually see it in our daily lives. So I think making it more relevant to our daily lives and seeing how much of an effect it is, I think will be really great to see it and how it relates to young people in that way too.
And it's really interesting what you said about the science saying funded by the EU and so on, and making people aware. In your opinion, as a young person, I mean, Ireland has been in the EU since you were born and since I was born too. What do you think has been the greatest benefit to Ireland, or several benefits to Ireland of EU membership?
It's hard one itself. I think the case of the economic development I think I always, for my Leaving Cert history, was actually studying when it was about the European Economic Community initially and how much Ireland benefited from that. But I think especially coming up later to the European Union, you actually see it yourself and be able to travel without any issues. And I think that's an miracle in itself. But I think also, when you travel, you also have the lack of roaming charges and also sort of rights as a citizen as well. So you can get healthcare in any country and have a peace of mind that you won't have to worry about being in any sort of country. You're treated as a European citizen. So I think that's important in that way, but also just looking at how much it has benefited as a case of rights and sort of everything that you do, really, and that it's probably a European bill or directive that has made it sort of more friendly for people to have sort of the rights they have.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, in my lifetime, I've seen, certainly when I was a kid in the 80s, Ireland wasn't as developed as it is now. There were still anti-homosexuality laws that had to be challenged at a European level. And even now we have things like we can roam with our phones in European countries or bring our digital subscriptions with us. So, yeah, absolutely. I've certainly seen a lot in my lifetime. A lot of benefits. I got to travel and live in France myself for a year, ended up getting a wife out of the bargain. So I mean, I'm really grateful to the EU for that. So just before we kind of finish up, I just want to ask you a little bit, have you any about some of your other interests maybe?
Well, mainly my other interests are sort of non-European and sort of very much sort of in Dublin or in Ireland. So very much for myself, I'm involved with the Fingal cycling campaign. So especially in Dublin 15, I was on Phoenix FM only a few weeks ago, talked about cycling in that way.
Excellent. And obviously, green issues and the environment and the climate change is a big, very important issue, and the cycling links into that. And is that one of the issues you would be involved in?
Definitely will be involved in quite a bit. I'm actually studying quite a bit in sort of looking at media and climate change for college, actually, so there's relevance in that. So it's very much looking at sort of climate change, and I think especially in the European context, I think it is a case of there was a lot more urgency than there was only like 2 years ago. I think before the election, it was a case of there were a lot of issues involved with like rule of law, but I think now we sort of look at, since von der Leyen being European Commission President, I think it is very much focused almost exclusively on climate change and the sort of the issues that had. So that's good to see, but I think there definitely needs to be some aspects where I think it could be. I think we got the European Green Deal. I think this is something that could be improved in some way, but I think it has shown there is an ambition. I think Europe is trying to be a leader in that, so hopefully they can maintain their leadership and inspire other countries. Absolutely,
and I think Europe is the only kind of geographical region that's come up with anything comparable to that. And I'm glad you mentioned the Green Deal, because if anyone is interested in learning more about that, if they go to the Fingal Library's YouTube channel, you can see a series of 5 interviews I did with various experts about the European Green Deal and how it works and how I suppose our lives are going to change in the next 10, 20 years and beyond with the Green Deal. Change it for the positive, I think, to try and make the continent climate neutral by then. So I think we'll finish it up there, Ross, and I want to thank you. That was really interesting, and it was great to get the perspective of a young person who's so engaged in these important issues, and we look forward to working with you again in the future, with Europe Direct and in Blanchardstown Library in general. And thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Great. Thank you.
Okay, bye bye.